Hello, welcome once again to Lehto's Law. I'm Steve Lehto, attorney at law in the state of Michigan, and today I'm going to answer a question that's asked of me by several different people recently, and that is, can you get a traffic ticket for something you've done on private property? Can you be ticketed with a traffic infraction while operating a vehicle on private property? And the question was first posed to me in a much more specific manner. A guy commented on one of my videos and said, Steve, have you ever heard of someone getting a ticket for they come to an intersection and decide to cut through a parking lot to avoid a red light, for instance? And he said, is that actually illegal? Someone told me it was. And I can tell you right now that in Michigan, that is in fact illegal. And it makes sense. I used to work at a gas station, as I've mentioned before, that was at an intersection. It was at the corner of Adams and Maple, 15-mile road in Birmingham, Michigan. And there were people who occasionally would have ants in their pants, and they didn't want to stop for the red light because there was a couple cars in front of them. They would just cut through the gas station parking lot, and you'd be standing, or walking across the lot, and somebody comes zooming by and almost kills you, and they're in a hurry, so they're driving fast, they're not paying attention to where they're going, and they're ignoring the fact there's people working here. And by the way, this is private property. You can't just cut across private property because you feel like it. So I've never seen anybody ticketed for it, but I've heard of people being ticketed for it. And of course, the law might vary in whatever state you are in. But I looked it up, and it turns out that, in fact, there is a law on point in Michigan, MCL 257-611, and to avoid triggering those people who get upset when I pull the books off the shelf, I've simply printed out the relevant code sections, and I have them in front of me today. 257-611 is the Traffic Control Device Obedience Required statute, and it simply says, at 1, the driver of a vehicle or operator of a streetcar shall not disobey the instructions of a traffic control device placed in accordance with this chapter. But then number 2 says, the driver of a vehicle shall not, for the purpose of avoiding obedience to a traffic control device, drive upon or through private property or upon or through public property which is not a street or highway. So again, it doesn't take the property owner to step up and say, hey, I forbid you to do that. The law already does say that. And again, it makes complete sense, because if you had people cutting through property to get around traffic control devices, the traffic control devices would actually lose control of the traffic, which they are trying to control. So yes, in fact, it is against the law, because number 3 says a person who violates this section is responsible for a civil infraction. Now, that raises a hypothetical or a philosophical question, and that is, can the government, the police, can they enforce laws, traffic laws, can they enforce those in non-public spaces? And again, there's a law that says they can, but I suppose if you want to talk about this on a theoretical level, what right does the government have to police on private property? So I looked that up. And by the way, I had somebody recently respond to one of my videos and say, hey, Steve, what's the law on this in Georgia? And I said, I don't know. I'm an attorney in Michigan, and I'm only licensed in Michigan, so I only give advice in Michigan. But I actually don't have time to look up the laws in the other 49 states for every single question I answer on this show. And somebody wrote back and goes, but you can read, can't you? Why don't you do it? Because the time required to read the statutes of 49 different states would be quite time consuming. I mean, it would be a waste of time. I've got time for that. But if you can read, why don't you look it up? Okay? I'm sorry. So, in Michigan, there is specifically laws in place. There are specifically laws in place that say that the police can write tickets for certain types of traffic infractions or driving infractions, even if they occur on private property. So for instance, if you are reckless driving or careless driving or drunk driving, or believe it or not, driving on a suspended license, if you're doing that on private property, you could be ticketed for that. Now, I suspect if you owned 100 acres of property and you went in the far back portion of it, miles away from any roadway, and got drunk and did donuts, I have a sneaky feeling you wouldn't get ticketed for that. But theoretically, you could. I'm just not sure how you'd come into a situation where you're interacting with a police officer. Most of these, however, where they come into play, are in parking lots. Okay, so you go to a parking lot of a Meyer or a Kmart or a Publix or a Walmart. You're in a Walmart parking lot. The Walmart parking lot's private property. Okay, that's not city-owned property. That's not public property. It's privately owned property. But Walmart or whoever the owner is lets you park there in the hopes that you'll then come inside and purchase their goods. Okay? So if you're reckless driving or careless driving or drunk driving or driving in a suspended license, or the other more obvious one is, or parking in a handicapped parking spot on private property, you can be ticketed in Michigan for those types of violations. I suspect most states have got similar laws in place. Now, here's the interesting thing. I can tell you that I actually had an interesting interaction with this where something didn't even occur to me, and I feel stupid to admit this, but I'll admit this. I'm a self-deprecating kind of guy. I'll tell you when I make kind of oddball mistakes. I was sitting at a light getting ready to pull out of a parking lot of 12 Oaks Mall in Novi, Michigan. And I was about to turn onto the main road there, and right as the light was about to turn green, I saw in my rearview mirror that someone was flying towards me too fast. I couldn't get out of her way. She didn't realize that my Jeep was actually a three-dimensional object which she was about to strike with her own vehicle and cause problems. And I couldn't go because there's a car in front of me, and the light was about to change, and she just plows into the back of me and bends up the bumpers on my Jeep Wrangler. This is years ago. So I get out of my car, front end of her car is all mashed up, back end of my Jeep's all mashed up, and I called the police and I said, there's a traffic accident, I'd like a police officer here for a report just because there's property damage. And the dispatcher said, "Where are you?" And I said, "Parking lot, pulling out." She goes, "Oh, are you still in the parking lot or are you in the roadway?" And I said, "Oh, I'm still in the parking lot." She said, "I'm really sorry, but you're on private property. And we don't respond to those unless there's actually, and she didn't say this, but what she's getting at was, the drunk driver, suspended license, or somebody acting carelessly or recklessly. An argument could be made that the person who hit me was careless driving. And I said, "Really? You don't write a report for that?" She goes, No. She goes, "You'd file that with mall security." And I'm like, "What?" And sure enough, I called the number, and a mall security guy shows up, and he's just like you expect out of a bad skit. Waddles up, asks me what happened, asks the woman what happened, and he goes, "Okay, come back in 48 hours, and I'll have a report for you." And I took the report, sent it to my insurance company, and got it taken care of. Of course, Michigan is no fault, which means that I got to pay for my damages. She got to pay for hers, even though it was all her fault. But that was when I first started thinking, oh, wow, private property distinction. And I'll admit, I was an attorney at the time. I'd been an attorney for about 3 years, and it had not occurred to me. So if you're curious about whether or not traffic laws apply, I can tell you this, because one of the things that I've been curious about is there's stop signs in parking lots. There's a Meyer Thrifty Acres I shop at quite often, and there are stop signs in the parking lot. And I'll tell you right now, if no one's around, I blow right through them. It's public. It's private property. Those stop signs don't apply to me, right? Well, believe it or not, I don't know if that's the case anymore, and I'll tell you why. Because MCL 257-951 actually says that under certain circumstances, the police are allowed to enforce other laws on private property under certain circumstances. And those certain circumstances are the following. The property owners got to request the police to do this. They have to use official signs, so they can't put up their own signs. They actually have to use the real stop signs or the real yield sign, whatever the sign is. It's got to be identical to the ones that are used out in the roadways. And then number 3, there must actually be an ordinance passed by the local municipality and a traffic order that allows placement of the signs. So in other words, the owner of the business approaches the local municipality and says, "We'd like the police to actually police our parking lots." And I suspect that there's some kind of payment involved or something because it's going to use resources. But you come to some kind of arrangement with the municipality, and the municipality then would have their whoever governing body is oversee this, and they would come to the conclusion that yes, we will police the parking lot of Myers or Kmart or whatever it might be, And then they'd say, okay, and you post the proper signs in the proper places, and we will enforce those. If that happens, then yes, you could get a ticket while on private property for breaking a typical traffic law, such as running a stop sign. Now, I don't know of anybody who's actually done this, of any businesses, and I don't remember ever seeing any actual police officers in the parking lots of these stores, except when they're up front, probably dealing with shoplifters. Okay? So, can you blow through the stop sign in a Meyer parking lot with impunity legally? I don't know. Probably, but you don't know. Because it's theoretically possible that the police could have gotten this deal made with them, and they might be, and in that case, they could. And there's no way that you would know otherwise. So you should probably be on your best behavior. But you should be aware that while on private property, in Michigan at least, if you're reckless driving, careless driving, drunk driving, driving in a suspended license, or parking in a handicapped parking spot without the proper placard in your car, those all could get you ticketed despite the fact that you are on private property. And likewise, cutting through private property to avoid a traffic control device is likewise illegal, and it's a civil infraction. Now, if you want to get smart with me, and many people do, the law says the driver of a vehicle shall not, for the purpose of avoiding obedience to a traffic control device, do this. And so then you'd argue and say, how do they know what my intent was? Was I doing this for the purpose of avoiding the traffic control device? Or was I just driving up to get a closer look at the door where the hours were displayed? And oh, the hours, the place is closed. Okay, and I just left. Okay? Could you make that argument? Yeah, you can try to make the argument. But remember that in Michigan and many other places, a civil infraction is a lesser crime than a misdemeanor or a felony. And for a civil infraction, you don't get the same burden of proof, which is beyond a reasonable doubt. You actually just get the preponderance, meaning that the cop tells his side of the story, you tell your side of the story, and the judge picks a winner based on who's more likely telling the truth. And you will almost always lose that argument. It's just the way things go. So, again, private property in Michigan, cutting across to avoid a traffic control device, you can get a ticket for that. And like I said, the other things you can definitely be cited for with or without any special things in place. Reckless, careless, drunk driving, suspended, or handicapped parking. And then theoretically, the stop signs and other traffic control devices on private property and parking lots could be enforceable, but it takes a special set of circumstances for that to happen. So that's the way it works on private property. Yeah, you can get a ticket for those things. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.